from San Benito, Texas, down a dirty, dusty road.
Welcome to Wild West Weather Report. In today's forecast, we'll be going over how the United States conquered the West. This all began before the Civil War, and in fact with the Louisiana Purchase. In 1803, the then President Thomas Jefferson had purchased the Louisiana Territory from the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. And what this meant was a huge expansion for this country, which before then had only been in the East Coast. And after this, Lewis and Clark were sent on an expedition to explore the territory, and this paved the way for many, many more explorers and settlers. For example, Zebulon Pike, who was an officer in the United States Army. He explored the American Southwest and would discover Pikes Peak, which was named in his honor in what is known as Colorado now. And he would later die fighting the British in Canada in the War of 1812. In 1835, the Texas Revolution began, and 10 years later, in 1845, Texas was annexed by the United States. Within the same decade, Iowa, Florida, Wisconsin were also brought into the Union. In 1849, the California Gold Rush began, bringing many men out there to strike it rich. My next topic of how the West was conquered is the Transcontinental Railroad. And what the Transcontinental Railroad brought was many more settlers, much more civilization, taming much more land. And the Transcontinental Railroad was previously known as the Pacific Railroad and began construction in 1863 and was completed in 1869. The railroad's completion was at Promontory Summit in Utah, where a golden spike was used to finish the railroad. The Union paid a lot of money to have this finished. They paid by the mile. My next concern or issue is the Battle of Little Bighorn, which was fought between the Lakota Native Americans and the United States Army. This was a battle led by General George Armstrong Custer, who was a cavalry commander of the 5th Cavalry Regiment. He had found great success in the American Civil War, and he was a very flamboyant man who took a great deal of care in his appearance. And in 1876, on June 25th, he and his cavalry were defeated by the Lakota Native Americans, who were led by Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. This is a significant event because in Americana, cowboys versus Indians is a very popular theme. And after this, it wouldn't take long for the American Native Americans to be subdued and assimilated. This brings me to the end of the West. The colonization of the Western United States took place in less than a century. The growth of the population was very rapid, and in the cities they were already full. The rural areas were settled, and the mythology of the West had began. The mythology of the West was popular right up until the end of it, and up until today, of course. After the United States reached the Pacific Ocean and the conquest of the West had ended, the age of imperialism had begun for the United States. The Spanish-American War began in 1898, where Theodore Roosevelt would become a war hero at the Battle of San Juan Hill, where he led his Rough Riders while carrying the flag. The United States would go to Guam. They would take Guam from Spain, as well as Puerto Rico and the Philippines. Speaking of the Philippines, this is where a great man named General John Pershing would fight the tribes who previously fought the Spanish. Now, this great man would also become the general of the armies for the United States in World War I. But that's a discussion for another day. This is Jeremiah Dela Cruz and Wild West Weather Report. Stay safe out there.
Then we moved up to Dallas. I remember I was young.